I think Stephanie should just take my time and she can talk about everything. First of all, just before, I want to give an overall picture of Michigan State University. I'm going to concentrate my 10 minutes on just the university. That's what I know. I'm the immigration specialist there. That's really my job. So I sit behind a desk and do a lot of federal paperwork. I'm not used to public speaking, so bear with me. Basically, MSU proudly asserts that it's a global institution. And it's in the same company with many other prestigious institutions around the world, around the United States. President Simon has written and spoken very eloquently about how this pioneer land-grant institution has become a model for the world grant university and the global impacts that Spartans working each day to solve the world problems. The international population at Michigan State, there's approximately 50,000 students in total. About 7,200, or 14%, are international students. We also bring in about 900 international faculty, scholars, employees throughout the year. They're coming and going throughout the year. Now, as Stephanie talked about, international students are important, but Michigan State is a global institution. It has a global focus with the many international centers, the partnerships, the study abroad programs. We have over 35 different languages that are taught on campus, and 133 countries are represented by the student population. The majority are from China, but we have 133 countries represented. Many aspects of university life are influenced by the changing immigration rules. Even without the changing rules, perceptions of those changes can be damaging to how welcome an institution can make an international student feel. The recruitment and retention of students and scholars is heavily influenced by perception, almost as much as the actual regulatory change. To have regulatory change in immigration rules is a long process. It doesn't happen overnight. So perception matters. Parents do not want to send their children to a country where they feel they may not be welcome or safe. Scholars do not want to teach or establish research enterprises in places where they do not feel they're going to have a good experience. But this perception is a two-way street. MSU, with the public land-grant institution, and most of its undergrad student population is from Michigan. The domestic students benefit from having the international student perspectives reflected in the classroom and having the ability to experience other cultures directly through study abroad. As the rules change in the United States, or perceptions of the U.S. are tarnished abroad, fewer international and U.S. parents are willing to send their children abroad. Our immigration process is complex and cumbersome. A typical international student must work through the process, the admissions process as well as the visa process. I'm just going to go through an example. If everything goes smoothly for an international student, they're going to apply to a university, gain acceptance to that university, provide evidence they have enough money to go to that school. The university's designated school official, or they're called a DSO, will issue the student an immigration document. It's a Form I-20. The student will then pay a government fee, make an appointment at a U.S. consulate, obtain an F-1 visa stamp for their passport in order to enter the country. At the U.S. consulate, they'll undergo a security clearance and an interview with a consular officer. Then, if approved, the student will have all the documents they need to enter the United States. At the port of entry of the United States, the student will be inspected. If they're admitted, they may proceed to the campus they're going to study. The student must report to the university within 30 days. The university is then required to report the student has arrived through the government's online system, it's called SEVIS, and to continue reporting the student's enrollment every semester until they complete their program. Once the student completes their studies, he or she will remain in the United States if they wish to gain some work experience. Then you're looking at a whole new set of rules and requirements. After the completion of the U.S. degree, the typical F1 student follows this path. The F1 student after degree completion is eligible for 12 months of optional practical training, or it's called OPT. A student must apply in a timely manner, pay a fee, and it must be approved by the Department of Homeland Security to obtain the authorization. Students who graduate in the STEM fields and work for an E-Verify employer may request an additional 24 months of practical training authorization. Again, this authorization requires timely filing, payment of a fee, and approval to the Department of Homeland Security. F1 OPT, or STEM OPT, are employment options that the student can bring to the employer. For any additional employment authorization, the employer must be willing to sponsor the individual. The H1 is the next most common employment-based visa status. So most students go from F1 OPT to, if their employer is willing to sponsor them, to H1. Again, this is a non-immigrant visa. But the H1 is a specialty occupation. And what's the definition? What does that mean? It requires a bachelor's degree or higher in a specific field. And the individual must hold a bachelor's degree or higher in that field. For example, we have a position that requires a minimum of a bachelor's degree in accounting. That would be considered eligible for an H1. As long as the international can document that he or she has a bachelor's degree or higher in accounting. Under these circumstances, the employer can petition the government for a visa on behalf of that individual. Once the employer files it, the employer's petition would enter the H1 lottery system. Because of the government caps or limits, the total number of H's allowed per year, which is 65,000, the employer would submit a petition to the Department of Homeland Security on April 1st of any given year. Then, if the employer's petition is fortunate enough to be selected through the lottery and approved, the employer may be granted H1 status effective October 1 of that year. So you file in April in anticipation of an October 1 start date. The individual can hold H1 status for a maximum of 6 years. If the employer wishes to retain the employee for longer than the 6-year period and is willing to sponsor that individual for permanent residency, then an immigrant visa petition would be sought, and usually through employment-based immigrant visa options. That would be the last slide. In general, there's one way to petition for permanent residency in the U.S. This is just one option among many. To do this, the employer must go through the processes managed by the Departments of Labor and Homeland Security and provide evidence that there's no minimally qualified U.S. worker who's willing and able to take that position at that time. The petition can only move forward if the employer can meet this requirement. For this presentation, I've simplified the non-immigrant and immigrant process into a few sentences. That's it. To give you a glimpse of the full complexity, this roadmap provides a good visual representation, okay? Although it's not readable on this scale, even when I print it out, it's not readable. I think it makes a good point. This roadmap outlines the immigrant or permanent residency, employment-based, family-based, diversity lottery, and investor options. This is only the immigrant, not the non-immigrant, and how to determine if an individual would be eligible or not. The current realities and perceptions of the immigration process will affect higher education. This quote from Senator Fulbright discusses the reciprocity of educational exchanges. When encouraged to develop these interactions on both the scientific and societal levels that benefit the U.S. for years. Open and welcome immigration rules can have a positive impact on human development, scientific learning, and a broader societal empathy toward the engagement with others. While negatively framed and restrictive rules can be expected to to have a damaging effect and prevent these exchanges. Open and welcome immigration rules do not have to forego security and safety issues. The current realities of the immigration process far exceed what happens with the rules changing and can be helpful or damaging long before any regulatory changes come in play. So more specifically, the President's recent executive orders to create a travel ban have had a tremendous effect on campus. These orders, while potentially only affecting a small number of the non-immigrant MSU students and scholars, they opened a flood of uncertainty, fears, questions about what the future holds. Not just people from the affected countries from the ban were worried. The International Office responded to many inquiries from students and scholars from all different countries and holding all different visa types. The concerns were real. These are some of the concerns. Is it safe for me to travel? Will I be allowed back in? These questions came from non-immigrants, immigrants, and U.S. citizens. It was a very chilling experience. The feeling was that if this can happen to one group, it can happen to any. The potential sweeping changes in being banned from visiting family abroad or not allowed back in the U.S. after an international conference was real. Some examples. We had a student from Iran who wanted to go home to see her family this summer. She hasn't seen them in 2 years, but she felt she could not risk visiting her family out of the concern she would not be able to return to campus to complete her degree. Another Iranian student was finishing his finishing his degree this spring, PhD, and his parents were coming to apply for a visitor visa to see him graduate. They were applying the same time the executive orders were being released. His family, in the end, was able to arrive after the courts halted the orders. The stories of the bias and the negativity are real. MSU experienced them along with other universities and communities around the world. Just after the election, a student from India was traumatized when a man chased her into her apartment parking lot and shouted, "Get out of my country." I personally attended the Persian Student Association. It was a rally called Hear Us. It was at the Rock on MSU's campus in February. And while at the rally, cars drove by, throwing snowballs and yelling, "Go home." So the heightened sense of not feeling welcome or belonging here are real. And that is not just for internationals, but employers as well. 2 students recently reported that their employers were so nervous about what the administration will do regarding employment-based immigration that they rescinded their job offers. The employers did not feel it was worth it, the risk or the investment when the future is unknown. I think if we learned anything from the most recent election cycle, is that a significant number of Americans are feeling left behind. They are concerned about their earning power, and they are concerned about being able to influence the entities affecting it. For many, the real concern is they're falling behind economically. If you consider our economy and what it takes to grow and to compete internationally, the U.S. needs the best minds in the world serving the engines of innovation to help us move forward. The best way to do that is to nurture the brightest people to work in this economy. Most of those people are going to come from this country, but some are not. Shouldn't our economy benefit from the bright young people who come here to learn at our great universities and then have the opportunities to stay on and move us all forward? Immigration policy can and does influence the economy, and as I will turn it over to Karen to talk about the economic impacts.